welcome everybody to the first episode of a new podcast for YBM called The Hitting Zone. Obviously, a good choice, the owner of The Hitting Zone, but we wanted to talk about baseball topics and crushing those baseball topics. Very excited about this new opportunity to host for YBM, and what we're going to be able to do with this podcast is bring on some special guests, social media guests, social media influencers, content providers, as well as local coaches and things like that. And today we got Brent from Top Velocity. I'm going to let Brent say his last name. I don't want to butcher it because it's a tough one. But we got Brent from Top Velocity, Covington, Louisiana. And thank you, Brent, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks. It's Pourciau. I know everybody butchers it. But thanks for letting me be on the first podcast. I'm excited and looking forward to some good topics here.
Yeah, so if you could just a little bit, just kind of tell everybody what Top Velocity is.
So basically focuses on baseball performance enhancement. So it's a training, you could say academy school. It's a system of training methodology for enhancing performance or the skills of, say, throwing, pitching velocity. Even we work with hitting biomechanics and exit velocity. So just trying to help the kids move and train and develop to the next level. And because it's a system in a school, we have an educational system, and this is all built on evidence. It's peer-reviewed evidence. So I'm finishing my master's in kinesiology, or I finished my master's in kinesiology. I'm finishing my PhD in sports science. So I've brought in all this empirical evidence into this system and this education. And then we've built evaluation systems and levels through that evaluation system that guys are working to achieve, and then training to support those levels and to help them move up to the highest level that they possibly can achieve. So,
how long has Top Velocity kind of been a program or a thought process for you?
Yeah, I started right after my career, and I finished in like 2006. So it's pretty much 2006, 2007 is when I launched it, because I used a lot of the methodology in my own career, coming back from a rotator cuff tear and getting to play, independent minor league ball late in my career after the injury. And then I pushed this right into a method of training, and then I started building it online as an influencer. So it's been, almost 19 years probably.
And I mean, from my experience of following you as well, is Top Velocity is not just pitching. It is hitting, it's fielding, it's position play, it's even softball. And I remember even you discussing, it's not even just those sports. I mean, you could be a soccer player and get benefits from Top Velocity, because the overall programming is nutrition, it's weightlifting, it's mobility, it's all of it, correct?
Yeah, we're just trying to optimize the athlete, and then we have the proprietary drill training to take it into the skill. So, I haven't built anything for any other sports besides, baseball, softball, but we could easily do that because the format would work on any skill that you're trying to enhance. So yeah, the system that we use could be applied to pretty much anything. We just have it all built out in baseball and softball, and we're mostly known for pitchers. That's where I really built it from that point, and then I branched out with the same format to other skills.
Speaking of pitching, this is a hot topic these days. Things like the pitch clock, the sticky stuff on baseballs and Major League Baseballs. There's something that you discussed on one of your episodes on Instagram or TikTok, whichever one it was. You were talking about how the sticky stuff's not really the issue, or pitch clock. It's more some of the horizontal movements and these things that pitchers are trying to gain. What are your thoughts on the arm issues in today's sports?
Yeah, it's a lot of things like you were mentioning. So you do have to look the fact that the athletes are getting better, and it's because baseball is getting better at recruiting around the globe now. So when you start recruiting around the globe, you're finding better athletes, and then it's just raising the athleticism in the game. And I think too, because you shorten the amount of innings that pitchers throw now, and the starters are down to like 5 innings. You have a lot of 1 inning relievers. Then you allow guys to throw harder because they don't have to throw as often. And so then the velocity goes up. And then velocity is so valuable because it reduces the time, defensively that they have to play. So it's a huge factor in how the game is played strategically. Then velocity becomes a high commodity, and which also velocity drives the pitches they're throwing. And then it plays into the deception of how they strategically are throwing to hitters. That standard of velocity goes up, and the athletes are getting better because they're going across the world. So what happens is you're now in a skill that on the elite side, it's a high amount of speed and stress on the body, and it's so you start to have the injury issue. And we already had a problem of injury before the velocities went this high. We already had, a lot of kids, very common through years, having arm injuries, shoulder injuries, elbow injuries. So you already had the pattern of injury, and then you exasperated it because of the talent coming in and the high standards of performance to throw harder and throw nastier spinning pitches but yeah, I do believe today, because the injury rates are so problematic, that if you're not really good at developing an elite ability like in pitching, then you could guide someone down the road of injury. And where we find more injury, this is going to be in the details, is mechanically in these horizontal slots, because they're more rotational slots where the arm can drag and the arm can get more out of sync with the body. So therefore, it's those mechanics empirically, like in the evidence, are showing to be the higher risk of injury. And the breaking balls from those horizontal slots are showing to be the higher link to injury, because it's just putting the arm out of sync, and the arm's battling forces more than working with forces.
That's good stuff, man. We have one of our biggest things that we try to do here when we train our athletes is the bigger, faster, stronger thing to be able to handle some of these loads that we're working on. And I can remember, being down there and you talking about some of the information on what the big leagues want. The guy that throws 90 that has a 2.5 ERA that's in the bullpen is not really that sought after as the guy that throws upper 90s with a big slider that has a 4.5 ERA, because we're chasing that velocity. Do you think some of that has to do with the push for the velocity in the game right now?
Yeah, well, it's just, all these clubs have all this crazy data, and these smart guys in there crunching the data, and they're finding where the value is. They're finding where like the secrets to the game are, like where the advantage is. And on the pitching side, the advantage is always in a higher velocity. That's why they can't take it out of the game. Like, unfortunately, the novice thinks that, oh, velocity is the enemy, we need to stand up against it. Well, you'd have to ruin the game to do it. Like, it's not going to happen. So and statistically, what they're seeing, like there was a stat the other day that showed if someone who throws 94 on the corners is hit, I think that hitter, that the average hitter there is hitting over 300, facing guys 94 in the quarters, and the guy throwing 97 right down the middle, the average, batting average is like close to 200. So it's like significantly more effective just to throw 97 at the strike zone than to try to paint 94. And that's statistically there. That's evidence. That's facts. Like, you can't, it's going to be hard saying, like, don't allow them to have that advantage. So if you take that advantage away from the game where they can't throw hard and you somehow govern velocity, I just think you destroy the game.
What are your thought processes? And I think it's been a few years since I've actually heard it, but they were talking about moving the mound back. Do you think that that's something that would be beneficial to the game of baseball, at least the high school and beyond?
I'm not a big fan of moving the mound back. I think it makes more sense to drop the mound down, because remember, they built the mound up for advantage, to give a pitcher an advantage. So that's, I think, the first thing they should do, instead of changing the dimensions of the diamond, is go to the thing that they use to give the pitcher the advantage, which is the mound height. I think they should start bringing the mound height down.
That's an interesting one because just recent, obviously a big Cardinals fan, and we were in Cincinnati. Or Cardinals were in Cincinnati, not we, but they were talking about the mound there being a little bit shorter, and there was some issues with Cardinals pitching. Was kind of complaining, and I think about the Bob Gibson days, and I think it was 18 inches or 15 inches or something when Bob Gibson pitched, and then nowadays I believe the mound height is 10 inches. Is that accurate?
Yeah, yeah. So I think they've always used that to give the pitcher advantage, just like they tighten the ball up and they smooth the ball out to give the hitter the advantage. They need to mess with the height of the mound if they're really going to start to give the hitter more advantage.
I kind of like that. I tend to worry about things like how do the breaking balls are they impacted by the lowering the mound? Because I'm 43 years old, so growing up, when we did flat ground work, they necessarily didn't want us throwing a bunch of curveballs during flat ground work. So lowering the mound, does that impact breaking pitches?
Yeah, I mean everything's going to change. Like what you're really going to see is the pitchers that will survive that or do well with that, or pitchers that are very much use the kinetic chain. They're better athletes. So those big, heavy, fat pitchers that could get away with all that mass coming down the mound, those guys are gonna lose an advantage. And yeah, the because if you're not as dynamic with your lower half when the mound comes down, then you're going to be late to release. So it's going to change all of your pitches. So, but the thing is, it's going to really like challenge the pitchers and challenge development of pitchers. Your pitchers are going to have to be better athletes if they start to do that. And I don't think it's going to set them up for injury. Will. I think some guys might be more prone to injury. The guys that didn't have a good lower half, but guys that are more good have better lower halves and better use of kinetic chain. I think they're going to survive it well. I think actually it'll take stress off because there's kind of evidence on both sides of the street that the mound height puts more stress on the arm, and then there's some that flat ground put more stress. It's kind of is not. We need more evidence there to really see what is happening. But I don't think any of that links to breaking balls. I think if anything, their breaking balls just won't be great because their velo's probably dropping, their body's late. Everything's now late. So their breaking balls are probably going to be loopy and high, like if they're throwing curveballs. But so I don't think it's going to be a health factor. I think it's just going to be an effectiveness factor when they do it.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of having them think about moving it back to 61, or anything like that. I just felt like I think there's too many changes in the game to begin with. I don't like the ghost runners at second base in the big leagues. I understand what the purpose is. I would rather see extended rosters or bullpen opportunities for those games that are 16, 17 innings. But those games are really outliers. That's not common. You score within the first 3 innings typically of an extra inning game. So there's some things that I don't like about baseball. I didn't like the pitch clock thing. I think I'm starting to get used to it now. I think it was more geared towards hitters' timing. Um, and I think it makes you think about the game a little bit differently as far as approach goes to hitting, because you can't take 20 seconds outside the box now and figure out what's happening. You have to make that decision, pitch to pitch. And so I didn't like the moving of the mound. I do like the idea, which we never really thought about, was pulling that mound down. And do you think that there's a certain number, like do we go inch by inch, or does it go drastic and move it 2 to 3 inches?
Yeah, I think they should do that experiment. That's just typically what Major League Baseball does. They use like these independent minor leagues and they test these things out in those organizations. I think they should just test out like what effect does 3 inches have, or I mean, they can even do these in studies if they wanted to. What effect does 5, 6 inches have? What effect does the dropping it to the field level have? Like, I think they should just test that out. If like a 3 inch drop drops velocities by a mile an hour, 2 miles an hour, it might be what they want, and you only have to go 3 inches. So I think that's something they need to test out either through their leagues or through research.
Yeah, I remember growing up playing. I don't think we saw a mound until maybe 14U or even high school. We had pitched flat ground, going all the way up because local leagues could not afford to put mounds up or different distances, or I don't even know if they had rubber mounds back then or outdoor mounds. And now everywhere you go on a youth field, you have mounds. So I thought that was very interesting. Content there is just thinking about dropping that mound versus actually moving it back.
Yeah.
Do you think that there would be any consideration of actually moving it up if you dropped it down?
Like moving the distance
Yeah, like
shorter.
going to 60 feet versus 60 feet
60
6 inches.
No, I mean, I think keep the distance there because think about it. All their breaking ball movements, they've all perfected that based on that distance. So I wouldn't want to mess with that distance. Yeah, you're gonna change timing in their mechanics, but I think that's an easier adjustment than when you mess distance. Now you're messing how their balls are breaking and when they're tunneling and how they're coming out of the tunnel. I think that's more disruptive to their game than it is just making them work on their mechanics, which they're always every off season they're trying to work on their mechanics.
Yeah, I mean that's what we do as youth coaches. We're always doing the same thing, and it never stops. I have to make sure that we talk about this today. I know that you're busy, so I'm gonna try to get you out of here a little quicker. But when I came down to one of the camps that you guys host down there, you had a few kids down there, 14 years old on up, and then obviously some kids that stay on campus with you guys, which I think's really neat because you guys have a housing on campus, which I think's really neat. Those kids didn't really talk a whole bunch, so I got involved and was asking a bunch of questions. And you asked a question about who played long toss or who loves long toss. And I was sitting next to Dusty Hughes, which is a former big league pitcher,
Yeah.
Kansas City Royals, which will be a guest on this show, actually. And I was like, man, I grew up playing long toss. My coach always told me, if you threw the ball real far, you could throw the ball real hard. And I was a big kid. I never thought twice about it. I did what I was told to do. I'm not even sure what the reason was. Never even asked because it was more of before he said the word, jump, I was already in the air by the time I hit the JU. So what are your thoughts on long toss? Because mine were always growing up, again, throwing it at 300 feet. I was going to get certain results. And you've got some material out there that kind of debates that a little bit, and I would like to discuss that because a lot of people that I coach with are 40-something years old. That's what our career was a ton of long toss. We never had issues, but we're talking about kids that are 200 pounds that are 6 foot, tall and things like that. So talk about long toss a
Yeah,
little
I mean,
bit.
the long toss it goes into player development. Like what because of the injuries that are continuing to grow, we've got to say to ourselves, what are we doing wrong developmentally? So you have to start questioning traditional methods, which long toss is a very traditional method. So I'm just questioning it. So if you look at the studies and the data on it, it doesn't look great. It doesn't really look good at all. Because if we're looking in the today's game and we're looking at the data we have on this old traditional method, we have to, because of the injuries, go, is this helping or hurting? And when you look at it that way, it doesn't look like it's helping. Because, for example, we have like the old Modus data where they took like 650,000 pitchers through their sleeves and they measured valgus torque, the torque on the inside of the elbow, which is the torque that drives UCL injuries and Tommy John surgeries. And when you look at that, it shows little league, high school, college, professional, and you look at the distances to where valgus stress peaks. So meaning when they hit the peak stress that elbow can handle. Obviously at the younger age it's lower, and then as you go up to the professional level, it gets a little higher because the athletes get stronger and better at moving, even though they're still throwing harder and they're throwing farther. They're still having to, the stresses should be getting higher, but because of their being better movers and stronger athletes, they're still able to increase the distances and handle more stress. But what you're seeing is at these very common distances, like 120 feet for a little leaguer to like in college, like, it's something around 220, 230 feet, you're maxing the stress that elbow can handle. So my question is, why are we doing that? Why are we putting athletes to these distances, which these aren't extreme distances I'm talking about. We're talking about common distances that these kids are throwing every day or almost every day. Why are we putting them there if it's maximizing the stress their elbow can handle? What's the purpose? So when I ask that question, no one can answer it.
I
Like,
can't.
no one can answer why we're doing that. And that's what gets me. And that's why I'm concerned, because we don't have a good answer on why we're putting kids through all this maximum stress in their training. Because if you look at the 60 feet for a pitcher, their arm stress is fine. So why put them to these maximum distance where their stress is at peak when they're never going to do that in the game? What's the purpose? And then two, there's case studies showing that the farther you throw, the worse your mechanics get, meaning you start using mechanics that you would never use in the mound. And not only that these mechanics are adding more of the stress, because you can't perform good mechanics, which like you do as a pitcher, like you're moving your trunk far forward and, getting a longer stride to move your trunk forward, where basically you're building more energy through your body. What's happening is the farther you throw, you're shortening your stride, you're shortening your trunk, and you're just trying to rotate and push the ball because the trajectories are so high. So it's like, now we're teaching in these max distances the mechanics we don't want. And we're getting to the peak stress on the elbow that we don't want. So once again, why are we long tossing? So that it's me just looking at the data and looking at today's game and knowing we have a developmental problem causing all this injury, and then questioning why are we doing this?
Yeah, and when you brought that to my attention, I was like, man, I'm trying to find a way to debate, because that's one thing I really like to try to do is just challenge the conversation, because I think it's good, right? I think having good back and forth can help, whether it's my learning, your learning, whatever. And you asked that question, and I kept searching for, like, why do I teach that? And now, I'm thinking, well, it used to be about feel, get the arm loose, and it felt better, or whatever the case may have been. I was never given a reason, and I never asked one. I just did it, right? And then as I got older, I was like, well, it worked for me. I never had arm issues, or at least I thought it worked for me, right? Um, and I had the ability to throw 85 plus, and so whatever. My outfielders don't throw that way. My infield doesn't throw that way. My catchers don't throw that way. And my pitchers don't throw that way. At no point am I trying to throw a baseball that's, over the lights, if you will. Everything is more of a pull down action. And so, do you think that there's like a comfortable distance that we should be trying to stretch it out a little bit? And what are your thought processes with that, with things like pull downs or training the crow hop?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at all sports, most trainers, strength coaches, performance coaches, their focus is the skill, right? And we call that sports specific training, skill specific training. And what they're trying to do in those forms of training is they're trying to get you as close to what you're doing in your performance in your training, right? So I don't go off the rails with that. I think you can go too far into sports specific or skill specific training, but I think it should be the focus specifically when you're performing the same movement as you are in the game. So if you're throwing like you would in the game, you should be training very close to the demands of the game. And the demands typically, say for a pitcher, 60 feet 6 inches. The demands for a shortstop are what? I don't know, 90 feet. I don't know I can't remember the dimensions on that. An outfielder, whatever, 120 feet, whatever the dimensions are, you need to be working within that range. So I don't think there's a need to go much farther past that or much more short of that. And I find that when you do go much farther than that and much shorter than that, it changes the way you perform, like because the demands are now different. So typically when a guy throws shorter than his distances in the game, he changes his mechanics because he doesn't have to use as much of his body. Or if someone goes so far, it changes the mechanics because he can't go through the same movements because the release points are now off because he's throwing at higher trajectories. So there is this range you're going to find where you play, where you perform, that if you go too far or too less, you're going to change how you actually perform in the game. And look at hitters, the same thing. Why don't the major league teams like putting their hitters in the home run derby in the middle of the season? Why is that a thing?
Well, if you're asking me, because it changes stuff. They use heavier bats, all of, and they take
Well,
rounds
they
and get
change their
tired.
mechanics to get launch
Lift,
angle,
yep.
and then what happens to them in the second half of the season.
Well, other than Albert Pujols of most recent,
Yeah, right.
he needed he needed that game to bring some power back. But for most part, you see them
Most of them, they
struggle.
get worse. Yeah.
Yeah, you see them
So it's like
struggle at the heavier.
why would hitters struggle second half of the season in the big leagues after an exhausting home run derby? Why would that happen?
It's clear. I mean, it's changing the mechanics of trying to lift, and it's what and like we're going through that now and I'm going to relate back to the Cardinals, and I don't know how much you pay attention to them, but Jordan Walker is a great young talent, 21 years old. He's had problems hitting in the big leagues because they want him to launch the baseball. Where he started the season off his rookie year with like a 16-game hitting streak, but it was a bunch of ground balls, and they wanted him to start lifting. Well, he went on a Mendoza kind of line kind of experience. And so he started hitting around 200. And it's like, okay, I'm going to send you back to the minor leagues. He starts hitting ground balls again. He raises his batting average back up. And then he has a killer end of the season last year. Starts the season same way. And I think and like you said, as I never really thought about long toss as changing my mechanics. I never really thought about it that deep. It's the information I can't argue. I cannot argue against the facts that you bring to me with the long toss routines. And again, it's something that I was told to do, and it worked for me. And maybe it never really did. I just always had it in the tank. Um, I just I can't answer some of those questions.
Because this goes both ways. You can use this argument against the evidence. So basically, I'm bringing you empirical evidence, and you're giving me what you were taught on the field, which is more than likely from years past where we didn't have all this great evidence, right? So there's a saying of correlation isn't always causation. So meaning like just because you can connect two things doesn't mean that was the cause. And that happens a lot. And you see it in everyday life, when your parents are like, we ate all that food all the time, didn't bother us. Well, they don't make that food the same anymore, right? You hear it all the time, right? When I was a kid, we did that, didn't hurt us. And it's like, well, times have changed. And especially with baseball, what has changed is the athlete is now having to perform at a much higher level. So things have changed, and do these old traditional ways that where there was no research behind it. It was just kind of what people did. When we look at the research, because things have changed and now the stress is higher, is this something we need in there now that we have the research and there's literally no good evidence in the research on it?
Yep. Sports became different for me about 5 or 6 years ago. I was coaching college athletics, and we were talking about just pitches in general, location, things that you had talked about earlier. You had mentioned, throwing to the corners or the upper half or bottom half, and then what the information was throwing the ball down the middle of the plate. And the University of Arkansas actually did some studies. There was over 40,000 pitches, and so it's hard to debate 40,000 pitches. And this took over years. And this was 5 years ago I learned it, so it must have taken whatever years prior leading up all the information. Was the batting average of throwing the ball right down the middle of the plate was shockingly low. That's where we typically like average T works there. You shouldn't miss that baseball. But that average on the corners is because we start to train that as hitting coaches. We start to train, hey, see the ball outside, let's drive it, or we're cheating here or whatever. So when you throw the ball right down the middle, it's like, oh my gosh, here it is, and you light up and you miss hit it. And
Right.
I think just data in general has grown so far. And when I first started, I was always against it. I was always against everything. I was like, baseball's a tradition, right? It hasn't been broken. And I think about information. Well, why did we start scouting, right? And we started scouting by paper. We started talking about how many strikes we were throwing. Where did the win 2 of 3 pitches come from? Well, we saw that if we threw a strike percentage of 67%, our pitchers were getting through games. We were getting early outs. We were getting through innings. We were winning ball games because of that. So data's always been there. It's just different with technology as technology has advanced, just
Yeah,
like
well,
our
there's way
athletes.
more. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's way more of it, and there's way better, and there's there's AI now that helps us understand it better.
Which I think is something that you guys provide, having some experience with you. Your guys' Player AI app is something that I absolutely love because you talked about evaluations or the bigger, faster, stronger, trying to really develop, the elite athlete, if you will. And I think your AI app is one of the best because I can put in information that tells me if I'm a 6'2" and I'm 165 pounds, it has a projection for me on what I need to do or a roadmap to throwing a particular velocity or hitting a particular velocity, which kind of leads me into the nutrition and the nutrition side and the mobility and strength side. That's got to be a big part of your game, correct?
Yeah, the nutrition is, but I mean, in but the AI was a real game changer because before the AI, I would just take evaluation data of the kids that would come in, and I would have to be the AI myself, and I would have to look at it and say, well, my understanding of evidence and research, like these things, these metrics are the most important. So let's focus on improving these, and you can see these are at low actually levels, because we have the evidence that shows the elite levels. So we obviously need to get these up. Let's focus here. Well, when I started using the AI is better than that. It says, okay, let's look at those pitching, say, harder than you, throwing harder than you, or you can use it for hitters, those hitting with more bat speed than you. And let's see what this group, the AI is actually going to find a group very similar to you, not very much different than you. It's going to try to find a group similar to you, and then you say, okay, look, here's the closest group to you at the higher level, and here's the key things they're doing better than you. And then it gives you this very strategic, prioritized list of, and literally says that if you go up to this percentile, it'll go this much in velocity. It's giving you a better understanding of what is the best way for you to become that elite level, as opposed to me just guessing and saying, well, these are important variables, let's just try to get these better. It's not that we shouldn't get those better, it's just the AI saying these are the ones that are going to have the biggest impact on where you are.
And I think that's something that only solidifies the eye test too, right? I mean, when you're looking at an athlete and you're talking about deficiencies, then that information says, here's where we're deficient, here's where we got to work on. I mean, that helps just solidify the sell of
Yeah.
what we're doing as coaches, right?
Well, a lot of it's obvious. So it's like you see a kid who can barely jump and sprint. You're like, wow, his legs are just not really under him. He doesn't use his lower half well. And then you see those things right up front. You're like, well, that's obvious. But sometimes you miss it. Sometimes, and especially for the kids, a lot of these kids come in with preconceived notions. It's like, they're 17, 16 years old and they think they got this figured out. It's hilarious. And they're like, no, it's my glove side. No, it's my upper body. My upper body's weak. And it's like, no, like, like I guarantee you this AI is making a better judgment of your potential than what you think based on some YouTube videos you've been watching, right? So I think that's the better part of it, is it really just gets kids out of their own, like, what they think is what they need, and it helps them think more, empirically, more like using the data. And I think that's the problem with a lot of coaches. They don't want to let go of their egos and their opinions and just let the data guide them the right way.
Yeah, 100%. I love this sport, and I love changing and finding new ways. And that's what I actually. It's funny you talk about YouTube because I've been doing this for a long time, 20 something years. Is when I got out of college, I started coaching at my alma mater in my high school. Shout out to the guys over there at Rittner. Um, and from there, I fell in love with trying to find a way to get kids better. And YouTube, Instagram, I actually think it might have been. I fell in love with some of the things that you do, like with your med ball training. That's where it started for me. And I'm out of shape. I'm not healthy as far as like the baseball side goes. And I started kind of following your guys' med ball routines. And next thing I knew it, I had lost some of the pain in my arm. I was more mobile. I started kind of understanding some of the things I was supposed to do as throwing. And you have a list of courses that you have. So far for me, it's been the med balls. It's been the way that it's helped me sequence my body. And so as a testimonial to just in what I'm trying to teach, I have to do this stuff in order to be able to teach it so I understand. And it has actually been able to change me. I was sitting with you, and you put me in that goofy contraption. I
Yeah.
forget what it was called.
The trunk accelerator.
Yeah, there you go. And he was like, "Well, I need a big guy, and you got some guy that throws 100 in Lacey." And I was like, "I can't fit in that thing." And you're like, "It's perfect." And I think I threw the first baseball at like 48 miles an hour. And you were like, "Do this, do this." The next thing I know it, I was like close to 60 without ever even throwing a baseball and warming up. So I love your
Yeah, I
med
mean,
ball routine.
well, I mean, that's to me, that's the best way to do it as a coach is you need to try it yourself and or work it yourself. Problem is, a lot of us coaches let ourselves get out of shape, and I think that's not good for your health, and it's not good for you as a coach. I think you should be able to show what you're doing. You don't have to show it like at the elite level, but you got to show it that you can even perform it, so they can at least get a little visual of it. I mean, I'm 47, going to be 48 this year, and I'm actually training a kid right now. So we did our morning, mobility, our morning anaerobics, or actually no med ball work, and then now we're going into our lifting. So right after this, I got to go and lift. I mean, it's hard on me. I mean, it's hard on my body, but yeah, I'm not going to be my former self, but I'm trying to be as close as I can with these guys. And I think if coaches did that, and coaches were more open-minded to new methodology and obviously using evidence to guide them, your ability to coach and help players just is going to mature over time. It just, these coaches want to hold on to these old ways or the way they did it and keep regurgitating this old knowledge to people. It can work a little bit. It's just not going to be that effective in the masses.
Brent, I thank you for coming on the first episode. I think it's been a good one. I value your information that you provide to us on the Instagram, TikToks, and just how can folks look you guys up, and then after that, enjoy your lift, I guess. But how can folks find you online?
Thanks. This has been awesome, man. I'm so excited to be on this first episode. Definitely want to share this with my networks. But I'm at Top Velocity. So pretty much anywhere at Top Velocity, topvelocity.net.com. And I really appreciate it, man. I think this is great. You need to keep putting open minds out there and just questioning everything. I mean, that's what we are in the game of baseball. We're always trying to find an edge, and the game is always changing. So you got to always be learning.
I hope to bring you on again down the road. So I'm going to try to find some personalities that can help, kind of debate a little bit, because that's
love it.
Yeah, that's the point of this show. And I'm like, man, when you sit down and have a conversation with this guy, you have to have your thoughts with you, because I think you put a lot of time in it and an effort into trying to find it. And I think a lot of that has to do with your own experiences, as you talked about earlier in the show, trying to come back from injury and trying to find the best way to get there. So Brent, I appreciate it. Thank you for the time, and good luck this year with your camps, and looking for more content on social media.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Have a good one, buddy.